we talked about it kind of being partway through, with the 2 different signing days. So, today is still not over. The signing period isn't for an hour. So, there still could be some things happen down the road, for months to come. So kind of like I mentioned before, this is a different era of college football. It's more like NFL, managing your roster. So we left ourselves some room, didn't reach on kids just to fill spots. And, that puts us in position for kids that are still out there, also puts us in position for grad transfers, regular transfers, and also, we can save some for next year too. So I think going through this process, it is different than, before becoming a head coach and not having the early period. So, no one could get signed up. So you'd have, then, all the way up until today to sign guys. So that does make it a little bit more challenging for first-year staffs, to come in and try to turn kids. So we lost some kids, obviously, like everybody does, but kind of going back over the kids, a lot of that was relationship-based of, not having, losing out to people that had longer relationships with kids. So we look forward, we've already started on next year's class, having a whole year to do that. And, I know everybody gets up here and says, this is the best class ever. Every coach says that. This is a good class with some really good players, but we'll sign better classes every year that we're here than this. Deeper classes that fill all the areas of need. Just didn't want to reach this year.
You talk about not wanting to reach, not going after players that you wouldn't have been interested in maybe. How do you evaluate this class? It's good by your words, but what are the holes you're still looking to fill with maybe the later players in the market later?
Well, I think the players are good that we signed in this class. It's just not very deep, obviously. You got a lot of people around the country signing 25, 27 players. So, from that standpoint, obviously it's not, the same, but there's really good players within it. I don't think we're really looking for, certain positions left. I think once now you get to this point, it's more, best players versus just adding a certain position. So, I think that, we'll go find the best players available, whether it's kids that are still left, grad transfers or normal transfers, or save them. Like I said, it's more like an NFL model. You got to, manage your roster. So, I'm not going to get into positions much except for, we'd probably like to really sign a really quality running back.
Lane, counting scholarships is difficult as it is, but I'm guessing you've got around 80 now, maybe? Does that give you 5 to work with in this different environment you're in?
Well, I think, again, a lot of people are going to be over 85, today. We're not, but a lot of people are, and, again, it's different. These kids leave so often, even though we had, I think, 5 go in and into the portal before we got here, and they all came back. Normally they don't come back. So I think people plan on, losing kids after spring, and so that's why we saved some too, because you'll see a lot of kids leave after spring where they're at because it's not going exactly, the way they want or the fit, and some of those kids can play immediately. Some of those kids can come sit, So I think we took, 3 in that way of, 2 transfers and a grad transfer. So look at all areas.
Lane, not a recruiting question per se, but with spring practice just right around the corner, can you share with us maybe your impression of the personnel in your quarterback room right now?
Well, I think with baseball, that's going to be tough, to evaluate that completely. With John playing baseball, and we want that to be his first priority. Because if you're going to be in something, I just think you go with it, and whatever time he has left, he'll come to us. So, but excited to work with a lot of really young players at that position, and 2 players that played a lot last year and made a lot of really good plays at times.
Lane, will Otis Reese definitely sit out, or is there a scenario in which he could be eligible next year?
There's always a scenario where they can. They've got to go through a process and a waiver process, and some of these kids win nowadays, as you're seeing around the country. So I believe he will be going through that process to try to get eligibility immediately.
Coach, have you given any thought to hiring additional personnel in the recruiting department in this offseason?
Yeah, our main priority, number one, was getting our 10 on-the-field coaches and recruiting. And so, we'll restructure that as we move forward here and hire some different people in some different roles, and because that's very critical. College football, but especially the SEC, because it's recruiting all year around, as you guys know. So we've got to nail that as much as anything.
Lane, you've talked about managing a roster and using the transfer portal. Kenny Yeboah, the tight end that you brought in, certainly looks like he could help fill what was a critical need. Just your thoughts on him and what he can do in your offense.
Yeah, that was really big. Like we talked about, it's like managing an NFL roster now with all the different ways players can transfer and come in. So Kenny was obviously a need, losing some kids from last year at that position. So very talented kid that actually thought about going out early to the draft and decided to transfer and, in his term wanting to play somewhere bigger.
Looking at your roster now, and I know you want to look at transfers and all of that, but how do you assess your defensive line position right now, particularly the interior?
Well, I think we've got some work to do there. We didn't add a lot there and lost some really good players from last year. So, whenever you come in a new system, you got to be careful of just adding players at spots and you don't really know. We don't know our own roster. We know these kids better than our own roster just because, we haven't worked with these kids and it's a different scheme. And so, I think what usually happens is after spring you start to see even guys change, positions, look at different things, look at different roles, and then work our systems around the players that we have, and instead of just making the players fit the system.
Lane, first time we've talked to you since you filled out your staff. Can you just kind of talk us through how you expect Chris and DJ to handle the defense together, and then just your process with hiring DJ and how you evaluated him?
We went through a really extensive process there. I'm not going to use names, but talking to a lot of people at multiple universities, very high up. Also talking with former players, former head coaches, and they raved about DJ. Everyone, in our short time here, I can see why. Has done a great job in recruiting, done a great job around the players, around the assistant coaches. Tireless worker. He's always in here. So Chris and him will do it together, and we'll figure out the play calling, that stuff down the road. But and that was an easy transition, an easy move because they had been around each other at Michigan too.
Lane, along those lines, have you had co-defensive coordinators in the past, and how's that dynamic kind of changed as opposed to one guy?
Well, I think again as we go we'll figure out the play calling. People do it a bunch of different ways around the country. Some people on offense have people that call different areas, of the game. So we'll figure that out as it goes. We know we got two really good coaches, and both really good recruiters. I think they've both been National Recruiters of the Year before as well. So, and again, work together so they know the same system.
The process of bringing Clowney, I know having a January signee is kind of unique, but how'd you kind of get him on campus here and then sign him so quick?
Well, again, when you bring coaches together this late with things, sometimes they know players already, and so Partridge was familiar with him from recruiting him before, and it was a quick turnaround. We got on him late, came in, visited, and I think turned around within 24, 48 hours to get back to start school. So, good player, extremely talented, and so I'm happy to have him.
Lane, what about on the offensive side? Yours and Coach Levy's arrangement, let's say, play calling, whose offense is it, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I usually answer that after the game on Saturdays, like depending on how the game goes. When we do really well, I'll take credit for it and call the plays. But, it was exciting to get him. There's a lot of, I'm familiar with it. His brother-in-law, Kendall, was, our coordinator the first year at FAU and, set all kinds of records in the history of the conference. And then Levy's done that basically wherever he's been. Great track record. And then the last couple of years at UCF. So You know, we'll do the thing together. I would anticipate him being the primary play caller, but, you know, we've done this before, you know, as a head coach. You know, the 3 years there with 2 different coordinators with Kendall and Charlie Weiss that, you know, do the whole thing together and then just help each other on game day.
You mentioned, Lane, that you have some good players in this class, but in the totality of it, December and now, is there a group or there's several that you think are ahead of the others, or is there a group that you think will contribute next year?
Yeah, I don't know that. Again, I know this probably sounds bad, but, you know, we only know so much about our current roster. You know, you can watch tape, but until you get your hands on them and you really work with them and practice and see what they can do in our systems, you know, versus, you know, 2 very different systems that was in place here. So I think it's too early to project that stuff, which of these guys would play and what we have and what we need. So, and we don't ever put limitations on kids. We don't ever say, like, you're coming here to redshirt. You know, we push all our kids to play right away, and the ones that aren't ready, they redshirt. But, you know, we don't want kids, you know, not having a high ceiling.
Lane, you signed Henry Parrish this morning and Kentrell Bullock back in December, and you put them in a running back room with Jerry Anieli and Snoop Connor, and I realize, like you said, you haven't had a chance to really work with those guys yet, but how would you anticipate Parrish and Bullock, you know, just fitting in? It looks like you've got backs that have the ability to do a little bit of everything.
Well, I think that's a good problem to have. You got, you know, with these guys coming in, you got, you know, what, four running backs within 12 months of each other. So that's a good problem to have. You know, we play really fast. We got high play count, so you can never have enough running backs. So excited to add these guys, you know, to 2 true freshmen. And I've said it before, you know, Coach Luke and his staff did a really good job recruiting these last couple years, and especially in that last class. You know, you got starting tackle, you know, starting quarterback, and 2 starting, you know, running backs, you know, at the end of the season that are all true freshmen. So they did a really good job.
You alluded to John Rice, baseball being his first priority this spring. Do you expect to have him at all during practice this spring, or is he going to be full-time baseball?
Yeah, I talked about with baseball about, you know, let's see how it goes. So he's all in. They're all in right now in baseball, and then, you know, let's see if they're, you know, if they're having a significant role, then they'll stay in there. If they're not, you know, then they'll probably come back and do more football. So I found out where the baseball stadium was yesterday because I was driving in the car, and then Ely was walking on the side of the road by himself, so I circled around to pick him up. He's like, I'm like, where are you going? He said, the baseball stadium. So, and I kept taking the wrong turn. He's like, do you know where the baseball stadium is, Coach? I'm like, I have no idea. But it was an amazing stadium. I didn't even know about it. Like, beautiful looking stadium.
Lane, you mentioned turning the page to this next class already. What kind of relationships have you guys already established with some of the kids out there, and what has the reception been so far from those guys? Yeah,
You know, like I said, for you guys don't know me, I'm just going to tell you how it is all the time and not give you coach speak. It's hard, you know, to come in and with this early sign day, because whatever percentages, 75% of the kids are gone, you know. So we didn't want to reach, like I said. We'll sign deeper and better classes every year that we're here, the longer amount of time we have to go recruit these guys. That's why we put together this staff. And, you know, we've already been around, you know, the schools. You can't go talk to them, but to see juniors, to go to the schools, to see coaches and things like that. We've already had almost all the top juniors on campus already at some point over the last 3 weekends. And it goes dead here, you know, new rule now of all of February. So I think March 1st we're having a junior day, the first day it goes live again. So we got a lot of work to do.